cross-border transactions that are affordable, transparent, and also considering the aspects of creating sustainable and competitive enterprises within the COMESA region. Before I start, I'd like to just invite my panel members to just give a quick introduction of themselves. Thank you. Can I start with you, James?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Chona, Country Director for Airtel Money in Zambia. Thank you so much.
Bruno?
Right, good afternoon. Bruno Mweemba is my name. I'm CEO for an enterprise, Panuka, which does horticulture farming. I also work with the UNDP as an advisor on green finance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Fidelis?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fidelis Mweemba, working with the Kenya Bankers Association as their Technical Services Director.
Thank you very much. Dr. Asfour?
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Amenia Asfour. I am Board Director of COMESA Business Council, chairing the Trade Promotion Committee and the immediate past chair. I am also now the interim chairperson of Africa Business Council, and I am the president of African Alliance for Women Empowerment and Egyptian Business Women Association.
Thank you very much. Bosco?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Bosco Sebabi. I'm a CEO for Fortis Consult, which is a private consulting company. But at the same time, I sit on the TDB panel on central banks and payments initiatives.
Thank you very much, Bosco. Thank you. You're welcome. So before we start, I'd like to ask my team on board to please share our hashtags and our social media websites. We are live right now on Facebook. We are also we're also available on Instagram and on Twitter. You can tag us, and you can also look at the hashtag, which is CBCDFI for SMEs, which you could use to also quote some of the discussions here and also provide your opinion. You can also tag us on at COMESA Business Council on Twitter. The same can be said on LinkedIn, on Facebook as well. So we look forward to engaging you here on Facebook and also on Twitter and on other social media platforms. So allow me to just set the tone for the meeting as we move into the discussions. So as you all know, the theme for the meeting is reshaping the future of industry and SMEs through digital financial inclusion. Many of you might be asking, what is DFI? It's such a trendy word and phrase that's being used across the continent, but it's important to also understand what exactly it means. So digital financial inclusion involves the deployment of cost-saving digital means to reach currently financially excluded and undeserved populations with a range of formal financial services that are suited to their needs and that are also responsibly delivered at a cost affordable and effective way to our various customers and providers. So the importance of DFI is increasingly recognized by policymakers around the world. So you see that a lot of SMEs are very focused on digital financial literacy, financial inclusiveness within our African continent, but also within other emerging markets in the globe. And in particular, DFI is considered at the core of economic diversification and growth challenges that many countries are facing, especially now in times of the COVID pandemic. You can actually see that a lot of countries are turning to digital transformation to create more cost-effective and efficient models that can help businesses to operate better within the environment that we're working in. So improving SME financial inclusion can increase economic growth, it can create jobs, it can also improve the effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policies that contribute to financial stability of countries. So a range of policies and reforms have been implemented already at a national level within many countries in Africa. But what we'll be discussing here is how we can standardize and harmonize some of those policies at the regional level to strengthen cross-border trade and transactions for SMEs in the region. So as we know right now, as we see it, the digital financial industry is undergoing significant disruption driven by consumer demand for new products, and it's combined with competition in the digital space. We've also seen a lot of players like our mobile network operators and the commercial banks coming together, forming synergies and moving from competition to cooperation as they embark on common digital transformation initiatives in their quest for innovation, in producing new product cycles, and also reducing costs across the board so that you can actually have more inclusiveness in the market. So we've seen a lot of smart adoptions of agile practices that are imperative to digital transformation. But now you might be wondering, why is DFI and digitalizing cross-border payments so important for micro, small, and medium enterprises? So as we know it, SMEs represent an important share of firms and employment in COMESA and the larger Africa. And in fact, the African Development Bank report of 2018 shows that in line of the world averages, SMEs represent about 96% of all registered companies in the region, and it actually employs about half of the total labor force. So a relatively large share of SMEs in the region are in the informal sector, and these are the kind of people who would like to actually bring into the formalized sector to make them more competitive and sustainable. So digital payments will promote formalizing this business acumen, and also helps to contribute a lot to regional trade within COMESA. So we're seeing that closing this SME financial inclusion gap with respect to emerging markets can develop economies and also improve the annual economic growth of those economies in COMESA. We see that SMEs are a key driver of employment, especially in developing economies. And SMEs are the largest contributors to employment across country income gaps. And we also see that a lot of SMEs are driven by young farms, and they are the ones who actually contribute to the highest employment growth within our markets. So greater SME financial inclusion is also associated with more effective fiscal policy, including better tax collection. So it's actually very good for governments to adopt and accelerate digital financial inclusiveness at a national level. It also supports monetary policy transmission and price stability, which also appears to be enhanced in countries where there's higher financial inclusion for SMEs. So as more SMEs also have access to formal lending facilities, the role of the interest rate in the economy will also increase, and it also improves monetary transmission and allows monetary authorities to better ensure price stability. So the impulse response of the output gap in a nominal interest rate shock will also tend to be stronger in countries where you also see that there's high SME financial inclusion. So in a nutshell, it's important to understand that digital financial inclusion is successful in COMESA. If it is as successful as it should be in COMESA, there will be a need for greater collaboration between regulators, bankers, mobile network operators, policymakers, various business people in the non-banking space and fintech companies to combine efforts to steer a path towards sustainable recovery of our economies. Some of the key issues that need to be considered is, of course, equal access to a digital infrastructure, digital and financial literacy, addressing the cost of mobile services, increasing access to finance, interoperability of systems across countries, convertibility of currencies for cross-border payments, and also avoidance of data biases when it looks at inclusive recovery. So over the past 1 year, COMESA Business Council has been working very closely with all these multi-stakeholders to advocate for a common digital payments policy for SMEs. And it's a regulation that will ultimately facilitate lower cross-border transaction costs for SMEs in COMESA. And we're hoping to build a foundation for a digital retail common payment scheme for SMEs in COMESA that is also going to benefit the larger African continent, considering that we have 21 countries that are trading in our region. So in light of this, I'd like to thank all our partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, our private sector partners who have contributed to this particular effort. So as we move forward, CBC has partnered with the Trade and Development Bank to host the first digital financial inclusion high-level public-private dialogue on the 20th and 21st of January in Kigali, Rwanda. It will be a hybrid meeting, and the meeting will consider the validation of the model policy for digital common payments for SMEs. And we'll be having stakeholders from the central banks, the ministries of finance, ICT regulators, private sector players in the manufacturing, mobile network, commercial and SME bank industry to consider and adopt the DFI model. So this meeting today, this panel today is going to touch on some of the key aspects we've been discussing over the past couple of months on how to actually strengthen cooperation and collaboration in this particular space. And I'd like to now turn to my expert panel to engage on the discussion before us. So thank you, panelists, for actually joining us as we move towards this particular direction. So allow me to turn to you, Fidelis. What has been, Kenya is a very, very interesting country, especially because it has been one of the pioneers on leading on mobile innovation and digital financial inclusion. So could you just give us a snapshot about what Kenya has done in terms of facilitating cross-border financial payments within EAC and COMESA, and what has been the role of the banks in terms of cascading and accelerating this process?
Thank you very much. And we, as you said, have been.
Sorry, Fidelis. My apologies. Yes. I see that Dilly is online, one of our panelists. Before you go on, because we were waiting for her, Dilly, could you allow me to just ask her to introduce herself to the panel, and also to just give a snapshot of where she is right now, because I know she's in different time zones in Seattle, and a bit about herself and BMGF. Thank you. Sorry, Fidelis, just a few minutes. Yes. Yes, Dilly.
Apologies. Can you hear me clearly, Sandra?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, my name is Dilwonberish, or Dilly Aberra. I work as a program officer within the Gates Foundation in the Financial Services for the Poor program, which has been, this program has been in operation since 2006. We do a lot of work on the through the foundation on Africa and so forth. I work in the area of payment systems or payments infrastructure, and I have the pleasure to, with Sandra and many of our other regional entities, and as well as in SADC, EAC, and Mweemba. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me, and apologies for joining me.
No, thank you, Dilly. You're very welcome. So allow me to turn, I'm asking all the panelists to keep their cameras open so that we can have a very good face-to-face interaction with you. Yes, so Fidelis, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about bank DFI in Kenya and the key role that the banks play in driving this particular agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you noted, Kenya has been pioneering a lot of digital financial inclusion, mostly led by mobile money, but we tend to forget a lot of the innovations that banks have led. We've basically got all payments digitized in Kenya. We've got government services digitized in Kenya. For example, if you want to visit a government service in this COVID situation now, you don't have to go to any government office. You just log in to a web portal of the e-citizen and you access any government service that you want. If I need to renew my driving license now, I just log into the government website, put in my details, pay by mobile, and I'll get my driving license updated. They send me a printout, which I print on my computer, and I'm good to go. So there's a lot of digitization in Kenya, both for businesses and individuals. And a lot of it has basically got a payments component in it. Now, the banks have had to work together with the mobile network operators, and we have developed some regulations and some infrastructure in Kenya under the National Payment Systems Act, which was enacted in 2014, which allows different players to play their rightful role in this particular ecosystem. So we have banks who basically keep storage of the funds and settlement processes within that digital financial ecosystem. Then you have payment service providers who are basically the ones who interact with the customer on the street and who then interface between the consumers and the business community to facilitate transactions as well as facilitate the payments. And then players who play both roles. So for example, M-Pesa is both a payment service provider as well as a settlement agent, as well as a store of value, as is Airtel and other MNOs, because they have their virtual wallets. But a lot of mobile banking where the consumers actually give their banks instructions via mobile phone to facilitate payments. So we have quite a lot of payments done. And as we go on, I'll mention a few others. There are too many to mention right now at the beginning, and I don't want to forload everything. So that should be sufficient.
Okay. Thank you. That's actually, it's a very good background to actually see what is happening. John, are we okay? Okay, that's good. John, just to turn to you, Bosco. So what has facilitated cross-border payments in SMEs? Do you think it's high? Do you think it's low? And what is your opinion as the TDB on this particular matter? What do you think should be done to actually accelerate cross-border payments for SMEs in case it is low?
Thank you. Well, we can only measure whether it's low or high by looking at the importance of SMEs in the whole holistic economy. You pointed out rightly that the AFDB puts it around 95% of all the firms being SMEs now, and also employing 50% of the population. So I think whether cross-border payments for SMEs is low or high, we can also look at the trade volumes that are in the informal sector. Right now, between Rwanda and DRC, you look at estimates around over $300 million a year in terms of the trade that goes on between SMEs across the border and not recorded. So I would say it's not yet enough. If we had all these SMEs using the formal payment channels or the payment aspects of financial inclusion, then that would bring this figure into the formal services, and thereby SMEs accessing financing as well. Because as they become more formalized, receiving their receivables and payments in a formal manner, then they access financing from either local banks or regional banks like ourselves. That's what I would respond to that.
That's very interesting. And Dilly, if I was to turn to you, what initiatives are you supporting as BMGF to actually look at facilitating DFI within Africa? And also, it would be good to understand the raison d'etre behind BMGF's interest on digital financial inclusiveness across the global market.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So just as a background, we really are focused on digital financial inclusion, the financial services for the poor team within the Gates Foundation. And if you look at the numbers today, there's 1.7 billion people globally that are actually financially excluded. And if you look at the numbers within Africa and the continent itself, of those 1.7 billion, about 435 million are actually in Africa. We also know that the majority of those that are financially excluded are women. 60 to 70% of them are women. Globally, it's about 55% or so. In Africa, it's the majority are women. So very much the financial services for the poor team is very much focused on how do you use the means of digital financial inclusion to help sort of bring these remaining adults into the formal economy, make them financially included, especially women. And ultimate goal, obviously, is poverty alleviation and helping people gain financial health, allowing them to pull themselves out of poverty and stay out of poverty. So this is sort of the big picture focus of FSP. Now, when it comes to what we do actually on the continent, we do a lot of things. So the FSP program is sort of divided into 4 initiatives and one that's cross-cutting. So we have a focus on policy and regulation. We have a team that I'm part of focused on payments infrastructure. We have another group focused on usage and emerging technologies. We have a group on deep focus countries within Africa where we work in Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And then the cross-cutting is gender. So across these initiatives, we invest on a lot of things. But the one I want to focus on is the work that I do across the continent, working mostly at the regional and continental level focused on really scaling and accelerating both pro-poor payment systems as well as the sort of the related rules, standards, and regulatory harmonization, which you and COMESA Business Council have been very much engaged with in the last year or so, and we're supporting you. So we support programs like the COMESA Business Council, the effort that you're doing right now. We've worked with the SADC Banking Association. We work with the African Development Bank and the BCAO, the Central Bank of West African States in Mweemba, as well as an EAC. We're working with some partners there. So at a regional and continental level, we work on these things. We also work with the African Development Bank, as I said. We're part of a multi-donor funding facility, the African Bishop Inclusion. It's a multi-donor fund, a 10-year donor fund, about $400 million. So lots of things that we're working on, but primarily on regional and Pan-African. These are the investments that we're supporting.
That's very interesting. I think one of the key interests on the DFI aspect is that so many stakeholders come together towards a common cause. And I like the fact that you've touched on women in digital financial inclusion. And on this note, I want to just turn to you, Dr. Asfour, because you're a very big champion on women inclusiveness, not just in Africa, but also internationally. It would be good. There's a question that has just come in that actually echoes the question I was going to ask you. How do we digitize women in terms of payments facilitation when we, even at the grassroots level, the woman in the village doesn't have access to digital facilities that can help her to become, efficient and effective, even in her small critical market share? What should be done about this? Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, because this is a very important question, and I am happy that now we are really discussing this, because when we start the program of financial digital inclusion together, when I was sharing COMESA Business Council, even we visited Bill and Melinda Gates to start how we make it simple digital payment solutions for the poor. And it is very relevant what you are talking, because our SMEs, women and youth, comprises more than 95% of our private sector within the continent. I am very glad to say that we are working on three pillars with reference to how we make it simple and affordable, appropriate, and accessible for the women to be able to access digitalization. We need to work on a holistic approach. Three pillars. It is first actually the people, how we really empower the women or the young or the SMEs to have financial literacy, to have digital literacy, to make sure that they are aware and have information about the whole process. The second issue is the policy, because the policies are very important. If we now follow the African Union Chair, His Excellency Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, in his acceptance speech with African Union, he declared this year, 2020, the start of the financial inclusion decade for women of Africa. So we already have this as a framework that we are working on it, plus the framework with reference to our Africa 2063 development agenda, which is prosperous, peaceful, intellectually integrated Africa, driven by the citizen of Africa. And for all our knowledge that financial inclusion is a main pillar with reference to the global development agenda. Having said that, how can we really now have, as I mentioned, the people, the policy, the third pillar, which is about the product. What product do I have the financial institutions, the banks, all the organizations that have target for our women entrepreneurs, not only at the at all levels, at the rural, at the remote areas, the cross-border women traders. So we need to have targeted financial products for these women that will suit every single woman. If I am a woman cross-border trader in one part of Malawi and I want to trade with another woman in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Djibouti, Ethiopia, how can I have it with my mobile to sell and to make sure that I buy and sell within this simple digital payment solution? I need to have accessibility to the infrastructure. That's why infrastructure is very important. That's why this dialogue is very important between the central banks, between the telecommunication companies, between the multi-stakeholders to have the regulatory framework. Because once I establish this regulatory framework, it will be very easy for our women across the whole continent, across the whole COMESA, and now with the ACFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, how can we make it happen in the 55 countries? So I need to tackle on issues of how we have the policy, how to have the infrastructure for the digital payment across the continent, how I make sure of digital literacy and financial literacy for our women, how I make awareness with the cross-border women traders. I personally made a questionnaire when I was chairing the COMESA Business Women Association, PAMCOM. I went on the border between Ethiopia and Djibouti in Tredewa. I questioned the cross-border women traders. I went between Zambia and Zimbabwe, between Egypt and Sudan. The women have no information about what we are talking, what policy we have. They don't know about even the certificate of origin with reference to COMESA. They have never been trained or what we are talking about. So we need a very important work of our work is to really see how we raise awareness among our people, among our women entrepreneurs, cross-border women traders, SMEs, on the information available on the ground and how we domesticate all these policies that we are working on it to come to all our women across the whole COMESA and Africa. The second issue, this legislation should be really, and the financial inclusion should be affordable, accessible, and appropriate for us, because it is not possible to make a financial transaction with my mobile and I pay how many percentage over the transaction. It should be, as Dilly said, very, very, very small transaction percentage that is gone through this transaction. Because if we see about China, they are working on the mass and we are 1.2 billion people in Africa. It should be a very, very, very small percentage on the dollar that we are working on to make it affordable. She cannot make a $10 or $5 transaction and then half of it is gone with reference to this transaction. So this is one thing that we have to work for it to be a real, affordable, accessible, and appropriate for my sector of the women or the SMEs. And of course, digital literacy is very important. How can I build the capacity of this woman in the rural area to be able to have this financial inclusion? And within the whole, now, Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we need to have sectors. Sectors mean that I need to have clusters for all our women entrepreneurs, our business people, to have these clusters and to really offer the financial products according to the sectors. I mean, women in mining and extractive industry would be very different than the women agriculture, agribusiness, very different on another sector with IT and graphic. It is really about how we are targeting financial products for different sectors to make sure of the real implementation of a simple digital payment solution.
Thank you, Dr. Asfour. You've touched on very, very many key pertinent aspects. And I just want to highlight them just quickly as we move on to Airtel. The aspect of policy, the aspect of having a good, strong infrastructure that drives DFI, which includes a cooperation between the various players in the mobile network operators and the banks. You've touched on pricing, which is a very, very interesting engagement in terms of the cost of transaction across the region. But what I also would like to highlight as a very, very key aspect is the access to the infrastructure, or even the tools for the woman in the rural area to be able to carry out this particular, to use this service. And I believe one of our panelists has also, one of our audience members has also asked, how does a woman in the rural area access such a service if they don't even have a smartphone? We do know that a lot of digital mobile transactions are carried out through feature phones, but it's at this particular juncture that I turn to you, Airtel, to enlighten us a bit about the mobile payments innovations that are happening within Zambia, within the larger market that Airtel is present in. And what have you done to actually ensure that your outreach reaches the person in the rural area who is able to, you know, contribute effectively to the socio-economic tapestry within Africa.
Thank you very much. And I think as a follow-up to Dr. Asfo's presentation, I think she touched a lot on infrastructure. Our biggest contribution to the digital financial sector has been our distribution, and this is something that has actually provided a reach in terms of giving out infrastructure to the unbanked in the rural areas. So we are actually taking these services to the rural areas, and this is actually leveraging on the GSM networks that our collaborating companies like in the GSM industry are doing. So we are able to reach where banks are not able to reach. And this is a collaborative effort that we are seeing across the country, because now we are providing a seamless distribution, a seamless agency where customers are able to withdraw and deposit funds from anywhere on the continent. So that is the first aspect that we drive. And on the issue of the technology, you've rightly said that I think most of these functions happen on the feature phone, where USSD is actually something that has been well adopted on the market and on the continent. You are able to see anyone, actually, most of the users are able to actually navigate through our USSD menu. And that's what we've taken pride as MNOs. And I think this is something that we continue to do to make the USSD menu more user-friendly and more accessible, and making it very easy for anyone to actually use. And that is also coupled with the extensive education that we do, because we realize that literacy levels on the continent are also very low. So we actually engage customers even on a one-to-one level. Our agents are well trained to actually upskill customers as they come in, to actually tell them how to use the basics of digital financial services, which could be sending money, paying bills, and even the purchase of airtime. And this is something that we've actually seen.
So maybe I can ask you something, James, on that particular aspect. Could you give us a scenario of what it was like before and after? Like at the, let's say, one of the border crossings, maybe Nakonde or Kasumbalesa border. When you before you penetrated into the market, were cross-border transactions easier? And after digital financial services came on board, what happened?
Let me start with the easier to explain, which would be Nakonde, and before I come to
Nakonde, yes, yeah.
To the complex one of Kasumbalesa, which I think up to now remains a challenge. So what would happen in Nakonde? I think you'll find that you would actually find foreign currency traders at the border. Okay, where you are going from Zambia to Tanzania, you have to buy your shillings at the border. Then you cross with a lot of shillings into Nakonde and do your trade as you do it there. But now what we are slowly seeing is that a Zambian trader actually can comfortably leave Zambia with their mobile money wallet topped up, and they can go into Tanzania and actually do a peer-to-peer transaction to a Tanzanian merchant there who's got a Tanzanian Airtel line, for example, and they receive and transact. And that is in real time, and it's received in local currency. So those are the kind of changes that we are beginning to see. And we see that across other borders. I see my colleague Big Boy is on the panel across in Malawi. And these are the scenarios which we always talk about in our collaborations with our Malawian colleagues as well. We see that happening between Chipata and Mwami across the border there. So these are the innovations that we see, and this is how easy transactions have been made. Kasumbalesa is a challenge, and I think this is something that we will also need in terms of a regulatory engagement from the stakeholders, and I think this is something that we could take up, because I think Congo DR as it stands, we are not able to actually do any mobile money either outbound or inbound. So I think that's something that has to be done on the regulatory side to actually materialize. But because I think that's potentially the biggest trade corridor that we have, and I think it's something that would really open up the entire market into Congo.
Okay, that's interesting. And if you could just touch on this particular question that's come to you, if transfers are done via mobile transaction, how are the taxes and cross-border payments incorporated? I believe that's a question that many people actually wonder about.
Well, I think when it comes to mobile, if you've done mobile transactions across the borders, and I would actually send you money, and that's a value that you actually receive across the only challenge, the only thing that is there is actually the currency conversion that you have. So if I'm sending you Zambian kwacha, I'll actually calculate within the Zambian kwacha, and there's no tax on mobile transfers. So what happens is that all that we receive are the charges that comes to the MNO, and at the receiving end also there should be charges that you should also be able to be charged for receiving for cashing out at the agent. So that's why I'm saying this is something that is actually life-changing, making it simple, because you are receiving money in real time in local currency, and there's no complexity of tax.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. I'm sure we'll come back to that as we're closing the meeting to discuss that a little bit further. I would now like to turn to you, Bruno. Bruno, you're the SME. Your Panuka Farms is a thriving business in Zambia that's in the horticulture industry. I'm sure it should be great to hear a little bit more about what you're doing. But I also want to tie two questions to you. One is from Dr. Asfour, where she mentioned that it's important to have clusters, digital financial inclusion products customized to various industry clusters in our markets. She touched on the fact that if you're in the mining sector, you need to have a product, customized to you. If you're in the agro-industry sector, you need to have a product customized to you. And I can also see a question from our audience, Caroline Ariokot, where she said we should have targeted, I believe she means to say targeted digital financial products towards women, or let's just say farmers in general, products that also consider the barriers that entrepreneurs face. So coming to you as a businessman, it would be good to hear what your thoughts are on this particular aspect, and also give us a few insights about what you as an SME have faced as challenges when trying to participate in digital payment systems, even within your domestic territory, Zambia, and as you're looking to also expand into the COMESA market. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think the colleagues are actually quite right that we need some kind of clustered, arrangement, given that different, sectors have different needs. Now, most smallholder farmers, you actually understand, we don't farm in Kabulonga or any suburbs. We actually farm, in the rural areas. But you actually understand our colleagues like Airtel doing quite a good job. But for them to actually provide a solution to far, flying areas, they need what we call a business case. And this is the numbers, do you have the right numbers and things like that? And so you'll find that sometimes we've got a number of isolated farmers off, the areas that the likes of Airtel, will operate from. And so I think there's need for some kind of customized, solutions for, businesses that are off the normal, areas that would actually naturally be serviced. Now, in terms of challenges, given the aspect that I actually talked about, the fact that most of these farming areas are actually off the line of rail, as it is usually coined. Yes, smartphones, I think it's one of the issues that is actually no longer a luxury. We no longer need those, basic phones, because on a farm, I also need to do plant diagnosis. There are some applications that I need. Instead of having an agronomist, coming on the farm, I can use an app where I actually look at just disease, surveillance and things like that. So that actually, I think, is one of the big issues. The cost aspect is one. Then there's also the issue of data. Yes, I think there's quite some improvement, but I think we still have issues of internet reliability and costs. That's another issue. We need real time, access to some of these services. So we need internet on these farms. We still have issues on the charges. I think they're still quite too high. So we need to look into issues of lowering the transaction costs. Now, one other issue that I must emphasize.
Sorry, can I come back to that one on Bruno? Sorry to cut you short on this, but you talk about issues of charges. So who do you transfer the charges to as a businessman? How do you cost them within your overall value chain process, and even as you're selling your products to the market?
Unfortunately now, what usually happens actually, the charges are actually usually grossed up. So if you're making a payment, the person who is receiving your money will always calculate the charges and say, well, you've got to cap it up. So that already adds to the transaction cost. I remember for me, actually, my staff at the farm refused to actually go digital in terms of payments, because then they were going to bear the cost. And they were saying, well, if you've got to do that, you've got to add the charges. So that overall actually adds to the transaction costs. So if I could just carry on, I think the point that I wanted to also emphasize is the fact that with farming, there's a lot of money in these informal areas. You know, the so-called informal markets. There's a lot of money there. Someone will sell a cow or sell 200 boxes of tomato. That's quite a lot of money. Now, one other thing that we're actually seeing is this wallet size limit issue, where sometimes someone transacts a big transaction, but then the financial services around, like the booth, cannot not actually accommodate that wallet size for that transaction. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. You'll find that for you to transact, you need to mobilize, say, 10 or 15 guys. That also reduces the issue of security if you're going to involve 15 people in a transaction. Mm-hmm. So that's the big one. Also, the issue of liquidity among the agents is a big one. Sometimes you want to withdraw money beyond a certain point, and again, you need 15 people, you know, just to transact. That adds to the cost of doing business and also lowers the issue of security. So that's something that needs to be looked at, wallet size and also the sufficiency in the liquidity. And one last bit, I think, is the issue of systems not talking to each other. What do I mean? You have, say, these mobile, you know, money providers and the like, but then transacting across different systems. One, there's a cost aspect, but again, you find that some of them are actually not integrated, especially from, say, mobile to banking. There are a few banks that are listed there, but then you find it's not every bank that is there. And so that poses a challenge, how you need to send money across different systems. So we need, I think, all these providers of most of these payment systems to integrate their systems so that they begin to talk to each other and kind of standardize the transaction costs. I think that's my take on that. Thank you.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting that you've brought up the aspects of the interest of interoperability and integration of systems, even within the domestic territories. One would think that at the point that we are at, a lot of that has happened. Maybe I can turn to you, Fidelis. Fidelis, Kenya has already moved very fast in this particular aspect, but as a Kenya Bankers Association, how do you relate with the mobile network operators and other non-bank operators in terms of ensuring that digital financial services are actually efficient and effective at a national level? And a follow-up question to that is, what do you think we can do better to ensure that it's standardized across the board in the markets, in the regional markets?
First, let me agree with Bruno. The questions and the issues he raises are very, very specifically applicable to Africa because of the conditions Africans have in terms of infrastructural challenges, lack of reach. We have, like you mentioned, there is an over-reliance on payments for mobiles, which again are limited because of AML. They limit transaction limits and they limit transaction sizes. So we have to have a strategy of how, for these SMEs, there is a growth path where they can be mainstreamed into the main banking system to forestall the issues he's talked about. But let's talk about interoperability. This is very critical because when you have multiple systems working together, they must be able to talk together seamlessly so that there is less friction. There is no errors, there is no manual interventions, because the more manual intervention, of course, the avenues for fraud and other issues come in. So we really have had to work together in Kenya to develop payment standards where we are looking at international standards that then all these systems can be developed towards so that all the systems are talking one language. So for payments, we are looking at adopting the ISO 20022, which is an international standard, but it is then implemented by all payment service providers. Then banks integrate to the mobile network operators through standardized APIs. That enables, again, seamless interactions through. And that keeps the transaction cost low because if you have automated systems, then the unit cost per transaction is minimized. So I would also advocate for the same within the region. I know in East Africa, we are working with the East African community to develop what is known as the East African Standardized Payment System, where again, we develop standards that can be then applied across the region. So there would be a standard for mobile network operators to exchange value. There would be a standard for banks to exchange value again. And then we link the two together so that I can move from MNO to banking integrated automatically. So those are journeys that we all need to make towards enabling an interoperable environment.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very, very good insight. I just want to turn to you, Dilly. Based on those journeys that are done nationally, it would be good to have an international, outlook on what's happened in various markets that you're operating in. How have various countries integrated with each other in terms of improving digital financial transactions across the markets? And are they cost effective? Are they affordable? That would be good to know. Thank you.
I was on mute. Yeah, so this question that's been raised or discussed here around interoperability is an important one, and one that we at the foundation, also in the financial services with the core team, really focus on this, and really it's the cornerstone for many of the projects that we fund on the continent as well, including the one that's being done with the COMESA and the COMESA Business Council. The question of how do you lower the transaction costs, and one way to do it, as my colleague here, Mr. Fidelis, said, is really how do you reduce that that unit cost. So interoperability basically allows you to in many cases scale, and as you scale, the economies of scale really do help with bringing down the unit cost. So how do you enable that? And so we work a lot around again these regional projects, because we feel that beyond just one country, if you have multiple countries, and as was said, banks interoperate with non-banks, with mobile money operators, and so forth. This actually increases transaction volumes and then enables costs to come down. So this is very critical. So there are many projects, obviously, that we're working on. FSP program works very deeply in countries like Pakistan, India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and so forth. And we have projects there. So one good one to mention is the Micropayments Gateway project in Pakistan that we're currently funding, and it is working on sort of setting up a payments infrastructure, a payment system that would actually be used across the country, across Pakistan, which, as many know, Pakistan is a huge country, nearly, I think, nearly 200 million people or so. And so that scale and that ability to drive transactions, whether it's government-to-person payments, merchant payments, and all the things that are happening in the economy, driving to that payment system actually helps drive down that unit cost. And in order to do that, they have to interoperate. This issue of interoperability, again, is very key, and it helps bring down the costs from that perspective.
Thank you. That's actually, it's good to know that we're all speaking the same language across various markets in the world, even though most of the time we probably think that we are not. We just have different models for different markets, but that's actually very key. I'd like to also, while I'm on your panel, while I'm with you, Dilly, I'd like to just ask you about how the world has reconfigured itself in light of COVID, due to COVID-19. There's a strong impact on financial services across all markets, including a greater need on digitizing payments across the board. Right now, I think most countries have moved to avoid, cash-heavy transactions to cash-light transactions, to meet the COVID-19 regulations primarily, but also to practice a safer way of doing business in light of what COVID in light of the precedent that COVID has put in place. So what do you think are the key paramount agendas for countries to consider in order to address digital inclusiveness, especially now in the times that we're in?
Yeah. And so, yeah, a lot has changed, Sandra, as you said, and really there has been a huge, movement of scaling up and really digitizing payments, as you said. So it's, what we've seen is like as of July of this year, the number of countries that are doing cash transfers to, for social protection payments and so forth globally, you had about 200 countries doing this, and this increased fourfold from March, where that number was about 48 countries were doing cash transfers. So many countries have to really quickly scale up and find ways to provide these social protection payments as people lost their jobs, livelihoods, and so forth globally. So a lot has changed, and a lot is happening. Now, what we have also noticed is that women, again, have a higher risk of not benefiting from these social protection payments. Most of these interventions are gender blind, whereas if you look at even on sub-Saharan Africa, about 89% of the paid work that women did was in the informal sector. So they're kind of, not even visible in many cases. So, we need to really focus on inclusiveness as we go, as we digitize these, COVID-19 social protection payments and so forth, and be really gender intentional because, the majority of society that's being affected by this are women. So it's very important that we do that. One of the things that, as I said, gender is a cross-cutting sort of initiative within the Financial Services for the Poor team. And there's been a lot of effort on our side to really think about what are some of the things that countries could do in this as they're increasing their social protection payments. And one of the things that we really look at is how, and this has been successful in some countries like India and Pakistan and so forth. How can governments really direct the social protection payments into an account that's registered under a woman, for instance, whether it's head of household or part of a household and so forth. So as an example, in India, because they had all the sort of the digital infrastructure, the official national IDs and so forth, they had the systems in place. So they were able to identify about 200 million women and direct the payments into their accounts. In the case of Pakistan, the entire social protection payments of 8 million individuals, all those payments go directly into women. So, being very, we just have to make sure that we have, we're inclusive in this case. I think Dr. Asfour talked about it earlier. How can we think about products and services that are, also sort of informed by the challenges that women face? Access to phones was mentioned here, and many other things, even access to digital IDs and so on and so forth. So lots of good things happening in terms of making sure that social protection payments actually reach people, but it's important that it's inclusive. And then, of course, underlying all of this is we've also noticed that countries that already had sort of a digital infrastructure in place, had enabling regulations, had digital IDs and so forth, were able to move faster and be more efficient. So how can countries work on preparing themselves? Of course, this pandemic is going to pass at some point, but the world is digital and it's going to be increasingly digital. So how can countries really think about the regulatory policies, the infrastructure, many of the things I already mentioned earlier to create sort of an enabling environment. So
okay. Yeah, thank you. That's actually very good insight. And it just leads me to the next question that I want to ask you, Bosco. So how can banks adapt to, how do you, first of all, do you think the mobile network operators and the banking sector are capable of shifting consumer patterns and consumer behavior on embracing digital financial inclusiveness? Or do you think it's the other way around? Do you think we as consumers can actually dictate to the banks and the mobile network operators about what we think would be the best services approach to help us do business? And I also ask this within the context of improving cross-border, transactions for SMEs within our markets. Over to you. Bosco, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Let me get back. Before we look at whether consumers will follow banks or banks follow consumers, let's look at what are the banks there for. The banks are there to serve clients who are the consumers. So the more the consumers demand for something, we must look at the demand and supply. The banks are supplying the services and the consumers are demanding for the services. However, the demand side can always demand for a service which can be supplied by the supply side. So that said, let's look at where MNOs have gone so far, how far they've come into this domain of payments, into this financial services. Actually, if we talk about digital financial services or inclusion, this is basically MNOs that have sparked this in the world. And this has been the span of the last 10 years. Or the last maybe 15 years maximum. If we look at Africa or sub-Saharan Africa today, we have about 469 million mobile money accounts. That by itself tells you that, and that we don't have that many bank accounts. That by that adoption itself, it shows us that the consumers have found what they've always lacked. That's convenience. They've always wanted convenience to transact, accessibility to transact. So we have, and out of that, by the way, 53% of the total 469 million accounts are in East Africa, 35 in West Africa, 10 in Central Africa, and 2 in Southern Africa. So you can see that the trend is that the more developed the banking sector is, the less the people have gone into the mobiles, because that means the mobile financial services came in to look at a certain gap, to cover a certain gap. Now, whether these two will merge to follow consumers or consumers follow them, I think it all depends on the business case. Is there a business case for digital financial services to the consumers? Are they giving value? And yes, from what we see today, yes, I think they have given the value. And now banks are following suit. Banks are following the MNOs in terms of opening accounts. So they have to ease this whole process. There will be something that will come up in a couple of years, whereby it will be convenient for one to open a bank account in the comfort of their bedrooms. Today, if you go to a bank, they will ask you 2 passport-size photographs and stuff like that. But I think where we are going today, and especially that the COVID pandemic has been, it was unfortunate, of course, but has reset the clock on certain things. It has reset the clock in the way we transact, in the way we live, in the way we work. Imagine if we had this dialogue or this webinar. Before, you would have had to invite all of us, we fly over to Lusaka, or we fly to Nairobi, sit and then discuss the same issues. And yet we've discussed that we are discussing them in the comfort of our offices at home or wherever we are, and we'll get the objective and the objective that we want. So here, consumers are the kings and the queens. Financial services, financial institutions, MNOs are going to follow what the consumers want, where they want to go, as long as there's a business case.
Thank you. That's actually very well eloquently put, and you've sort of set precedents for some of the questions that are being asked here by some of the our audience members, because I can see many people are saying, can we have a pilot project in some of the countries to understand how we can actually push, a low value digital payment scheme for SMEs to see if it can work. Other people are asking about driving the pricing downwards. So I can see there's quite a bit of excitement on this particular aspect. So just to inform the audience, based on what Bosco has said, we have a CBC as a private sector working with various stakeholders. We have completed a business case that does inform the need for a regulatory framework that can actually help to standardize and harmonize digital cross-border payments for SMEs. We are presenting the policy, a digital common payments policy, to the regulators in January 2021. And following that, just as has been suggested by one of our audience members, we will be piloting a business model structure within various countries that can meet the criteria for the digital, for the digital common payment policy. So we are moving in that direction, and I'm glad to see that we seem to have also an alignment from our general audience on the same. So I just want to ask you panel members, because I've seen a lot of smiles as Bosco was talking. Do you have any question across the board to each other? Is there any question that one panel member would like to ask another panel member before we move to the second round of questions?
Well, I think before I mute myself,
sorry.
Yes.
Before I mute myself, let me ask something that James mentioned, Airtel. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that a trader from Tanzania can move across to a trader in Tanzania, and they're able to transact very quickly. Very good for that. Now, in the back office, how do you handle that currency conversion between the kwacha and the Tanzanian shilling?
Okay, so it's what happens is that we actually do those transactions through a partner, and we have daily rates that prevail in terms of conversion. So I think, like I said, it's the real-time conversion that comes to you based on the daily rate that is set in the system by our partner that does that integration. And it's good that you've asked that, because I was actually going to come to another issue, which I think is now going to drive us towards regulation. Because if you notice that I only mentioned that the transactions only happen from Zambia to Tanzania, but there's nothing that comes from Tanzania to Zambia, because I think that Tanzania currently has a regulation that forbids to send, they cannot send outside EAC. And those are the kind of interventions that we actually seek from within the COMESA to make sure that we have this kind of harmonized regulation that will actually encourage trade. And if you wish, just as a snapshot, if I can just share my screen just for a moment, just to show you how we. Actually, it's not. I cannot share a screen, but the variance that is there in terms of the discrepancy that is there in terms of the outbound from Zambia and the inbound from Tanzania actually shows that there's an imbalance which we really need to address in terms of also us beginning to get that kind of transactions. And like I said, this is not just an Airtel discussion. I think this is something that affects all MNOs in Zambia. And actually, as we speak here, I'm actually speaking practically of on behalf of all MNOs that are under CBC, because I think we share that discussion under CBC. So I think these are the challenges that we have brought in and submitted. And it's not only peculiar to us, but all operators just looking at how we can have harmonized regulation that will also address the issue of the limits, which I think my brother Bruno also attributed to. So I think those are the kind of engagements that we continue to have to make sure that we have that.
Okay. And I think Fidelis from the Kenya Bankers Association would like to contribute to this discussion. Fidelis?
Yes, James has some very pertinent issues, but I would like to also respond to John Bosco on the issue of will the customers follow the banks or the banks follow the customers? In our scenario, we've actually seen some developments where neither the bank nor the MNO are actually developing the systems. There have come some organizations which are calling themselves fintechs, who are actually exploring these opportunities and taking advantage of this. And then they are leveraging on the infrastructure set by the MNOs and the banks to offer solutions that are specifically targeted to specific problems. And that is how the ecosystem is growing. So we are now not looking at it as just a duopoly of MNOs and banks. We are looking at a lot of people who are adding value to the whole process by developing custom solutions that then run on the rails that have been set by the banks and MNOs. Now that has two advantages. Number one is banks are not very good at developing innovation because they are considered to be conservative and risk averse. So somebody else develops something that is quick, that then can be able to deliver value quickly, and then they leverage on the existing infrastructure that banks have put in place. So the fintech area is full of innovators who come in, put in solutions that are, number one, very quick because of the agile nature. Number two, they are looking at lowering costs because with competition, then it becomes a fight to the bottom. So there's always everybody fighting to lower the transaction cost to be more attractive to the consumer. Now, James is right in that there is going to be an imbalance of trade in countries that are looking at lowering or increasing their volumes based on the exchange rate. Number one is if a country doesn't have a fluid exchange rate situation, and if they have controlled the exchange rate, then it becomes that much harder for the SMEs, because what they do is they revert back to trading on the dollar, which all of us know is, number one, very expensive, and it fluctuates a lot across Africa because of the different economic scenarios across Africa. So we really need to look at standardizing some of these things so that we can allow transactions across. Now, for East Africa, we have the EAP systems, which all the central banks exchange in individual countries. In COMESA, we have reps, which again, we can leverage to do that. So what we need to do as an industry is to drive the consumers and aggressively market these systems to ensure that they are aware that I can transact from Zambia in Kwacha to trade with somebody in Malawi or to trade somebody in Kenya. And the central banks will do the conversions for you. So we can basically be able to navigate the issues without having to buy dollars and exchange. And so that is what I was looking to add in terms of, number one, setting up standards across East Africa for not just systems, but also for processes, standards for ensuring that consumers know these things. And then we can be able to allow businesses to thrive by ensuring that they can leverage on these facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And I want to bring in Bruno now as an industry player. What's your contribution to this matter? I can see your hand is up. What would you like to say?
Yeah, it's a contribution and also I think a question to James. It's unfortunate he seems to be getting bombarded with questions. But remember, I raised the issue of systems not talking to each other and the need for integration. I mean, truth be told, this is a thorny issue because if I'm on Airtel and I hear someone says, well, send me money on Zamtel or any other line, I need to scratch my head, start Googling how the process goes and the transaction cost. So I'm just wondering whether these guys do sit, have you been talking and what's been going on in terms of system integration, but also just not just among us, the MNOs, but also within, say, the banking sector also, because we need these systems to also be integrated. Has there been any discussions around that issue? What are those backroom, discussions that are going on? Thank you.
Well, like I said, I think my sitting here is not exclusively on an Airtel front. I would also want to mention that I'm sitting here as chair of the MNOs on CBC, and I'm here glad to report that if you are looking in a Zambian context, and specifically, we are actually fully live on the national financial switch, because as we sit now, all MNOs are actually integrated on the national financial switch, meaning that where you are sitting there, Bruno, I can actually send you direct to your wallet, Airtel, and you can send me direct to my wallet from MTN, and also Zamtel as well. So all MNOs are actually fully integrated on the national financial switch. And this is something that we actually commend the Bank of Zambia for really taking leadership and ensuring that all of us are actually fully live on the financial switch. Now, MNOs live, yes. Banks, yes, we have a few participating banks that have come in on the first phase of the national financial switch. and we are getting all other banks coming in on the next phase. Why did we have the few banks coming in phase one? The idea was just to test the concept in terms of having transactions that are going to be flowing from wallet to banks and bank to wallets as well. So we have done that. The third tier that we've got payment services providers also fully integrated on the national financial switch. So you have the likes of Zona, Sigret, and Kazan, fully integrated. And this actually brings into play a wider distribution and also wider players coming in terms of bringing in the issue of available cash and float to the market. So I think this is one thing that we really have to commend the Bank of Zambia for taking leadership and taking us all to integrate on the national financial switch. I hope I've fully answered your question, Bruno.
Yes, thank you. And that's great. I think that's a great response. Bruno, I'm sure we'll even pick up on some of these discussions as we come back to you. So now we're moving into the final session of this particular meeting, as we're also catching up on various questions. Can I invite the panel to look at the chat group? There's so many questions that are being brought up. And as we come to you, I'd like to also consider responding to some of those questions. You can see aspects of consumer protection. There's a question that is very, very pertinent, looking at just to highlight it. It's talking about refunds by LC Montali. Due to mobile banking systems errors, the refunds take a long time and requires quite different approaches on refunds. So there's a need for a platform that can effectively deal with this regionally. I know in some cases, some people have also wondered what happens in terms of how do they get do they actually even get their refunds? And the aspects of consumer protection comes into play. It would be good to hear what the bankers and the mobile network operators are thinking in line with this. So please look at the questions and see what you could actually pick up on to respond to. So Dr. Asfour, I'm now coming back to you. So what aspects need to be considered when designing and implementing cross-border payment system solutions for women in business? Especially looking at the various dynamics in the African context. As you've seen also, the audience itself has raised that some people, some women do not have access to, they don't have the best bandwidth. They don't have access to phones. Is there a way we can engage with mobile network operators to sell phones at cost? Or is there a possibility of selling phones as a service or giving phones as a service and selling the service itself? What kind of innovative mobile model approaches could be used to ensure that the women in business, the cross-border traders, the people at the grassroots level are included within the ecosystem of digital financial services? Over to you.
Thank you, Sandra. I mean, this is a collective approach, actually. Collective approach, which is all our multi-stakeholders should be involved in. As I mentioned, really, it is how can we have access to women at the grassroots for these smartphones? I mean, that is how we really want to have this economic growth, and to have economic growth and decrease of poverty in order to have a reflection on the daily life of the women to be able to access these mobile phones. One of the innovative solutions that I would think that we really have to have cooperatives where we have these women coming into cooperatives, and within those cooperatives, we can supply the women with those phones that can be accessible and can make the issue of interoperability. The whole issue is about coordination. As my brother has said, we need to have coordination among all the stakeholders. I make them into 10 C's. I tend to, for the people to see, so it is really about cooperatives, it is about collaboration, it's about coordination, it's about cost-effective and cost aspect affordability. It's about capacity building and training. We need to make capacity building for the women in order to have digital literacy, to have financial literacy. We have to have competitive financial products targeted for women. We have to have, as my brother said, consumer needs financial services. It's about really collective approach. It's about clusters. It's about a conducive environment and regulatory framework all those starting with C. So it is not one discipline, it's a multidisciplinary, that those women, if we bring them into groups as clusters, if we have collaborative approach, we can supply for them those tools that will really, those tools will be part of the whole ecosystem that will raise their capacity and make sure that they are able to, we integrate them within the whole system of financial inclusion, because we cannot all the time talk about financial inclusion while the women are not included, while the informal cross-border traders, while the informal, we have majority of our women on the ground have informal. So how can we give them incentives to formalize this? And if we do this, the leaders and the politicians and the policymakers have to make sure to have to guarantee the conducive environment, because this will also retain on the revenue on the taxes when we formalize those. But the major issue why the women don't want to formalize, because they cannot take bookkeeping, they are afraid from all the taxes authorities, they are afraid from all the regulatory system. If we make the regulatory system very affordable for them, if we make the financial system not complicated for them, if we take into consideration that we give them all the tools in order to include them with this financial inclusion, then it is really what I say, a collaborative approach, and beyond beyond the box, as they say, because they will not go to a bank to have a bank account. They will not be able to go to formalize their company unless they are really given the insurance, the incentives, the indigenous capacity, the integration, the information, the infrastructure, the innovative approaches, investment, inclusion, the increased access to information and capacity building. So all those are by N, by the way. So what we really need to do is, we here as coming together have to put a roadmap, a plan for financial inclusion that starts from the people, how we build their capacity, the policy, and the product. The product has to be targeted to all our sectors. The policy has to be a conducive environment, and the people, we need to build their capacity.
Okay. That's very interesting, Dr. Asfour. But as you know, from what we've done when working with COMESA Business Council, we've talked to women at the grassroots level. We have trained so many, over thousands of cross-border traders and women in COMESA. And some of the key things that we have learned is the need for women to have a digital footprint or a digital interface, with the customer.
That is very important, because
but even as you bring it up, this still comes to it's also difficult to even change the mindset of a woman to embrace digital inclusiveness and digital tools. So can you kindly give some insights on how that could be, encouraged within this SME sector? Because we need to move businesses into the digital footprint ecosystem.
This is very important, because the main incentive for the women to do this is to make sure that it has a return on her investment and has a return with this. So the new digital platform that has been really like 50 million women Africa Speak, that was just launched in Egypt the day before yesterday, about bringing all 50 million Speak. How will she be able to register her product within this digital platform and make sure that within the financial system, she's able to market her product? Because marketing is a very, very, very big obstacle with reference to all the women entrepreneurs on the ground. So if we give her a tool like this digital platform of 50 million women Africa Speak, or even the Africa platform that was launched during the Africa Integration Day, like what we call Sukuku Africa, which is a new platform that we are putting together under umbrella of African Union as a digital platform. Sukuku in Swahili is a souk, is a market. So if the women, of all the women are able to register their products within this Sukuku Africa, within the 50 million women Speak, within the business, then we definitely will have an incentive for her to be able to formalize her product, to go into this Sukuku. But I need to have an outreach strategy, I cannot launch a 50 million women Africa Speak while I'm staying here in my office. We need to have an outreach strategy that we go to the women on the grassroots, to the cross-border women traders. We want to have a single window, for instance, for customs. How can we have an e-commerce? How we have an e-customs? How we make all the conducive environment for our women, cross-border women traders. It's really a holistic approach and a collaborative work that in COMESA, we did a lot of really initiative, even like sourcing from women vendors that we did already. We trained 480 SMEs every year to meet the standards, because this is how we integrate the local vendors or the SMEs with the big corporates. In our COMESA, we have a flagship program, which we went to all big companies and corporates to source from local vendors. They asked us to train them to have a standard product. So this is how COMESA Business Council made this. They trained 480 SMEs every year. Then these products can be standard, and they can export it and supply it to big corporates. The same issue is really how we train the women on the ground for digitalization, to have access to financial inclusion, and to have all our brothers here and sisters coming together to have this roadmap agenda of reaching out to our women and the SMEs and the young entrepreneurs on the ground.
Thank you. And I think that question, when we come to the rest of the speakers, it would be good to know what Airtel has done in terms of SME inclusiveness and capacity building so that they can actually embrace your product, what the bankers associations are thinking, or what they've also done in terms of supporting, your consumer market to be able to use your product effectively, and also to hear what the Regional Development Bank is thinking about in terms of supporting SMEs across the markets. Now, I want to come to you, Dilly. I would like to really, I'm going to pose two questions to you. First of all, from your experience in supporting the establishment of pro-poor digital payment platforms, because this is more or less what we're actually discussing here, yeah? In various continents in the region, what are some of the best practices in terms of policy harmonization within those markets? At a time when I had a discussion with one of your colleagues, David Lubinsky, where he gave a chart that showed how harmonized policies actually drove the cost of transaction, downwards, and there was quite a lot of volume of transactions that were put in place. So is it also that we need to change our mindset to focus on volume over value when we're looking at this particular market segment? Over to you. Dilly, you'll need to speak louder. We can't hear you. No, you're so faint. You're so like in the background. You're on mute now. Let me try to unmute you. Okay. No. Can you hear her, Bosco? Can you hear Dilly?
I can hardly
Sorry,
hear her.
I can't hear her.
Okay, I think she's setting up.
How about now?
Perfect.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry about that. So yes, so your question around what are some of the best practices that we've come to learn as we supported projects on the continent, in particular, pro-poor payment projects across the continent. So first of all, one of the things that we've realized or have come to share with the industry is when you're thinking about designing sort of an open, pro-poor, inclusive payment platform that really focuses on the poor and low-income households, there are certain design principles that you need to put in place to make that possible. And some of these things are, in the design of the payment platform, you need to make sure that it's sort of open and inclusive of all players. You have to enable, it has to be governed by the participants. It has to be, cost recovery or not for loss. It has to be instant or real payments, same day settlements, irrevocable, and so on and so forth. And the whole point of this is, how do you sort of reduce the risk out of this system such that it's not so expensive for the payment platform or the switch to provide services, thereby reducing the cost of delivery and eventually cost of transactions. So I think one of the key things is, even in the COMESA region, and as you're working on this on your project, I know you've considered some of these as key sort of principles in designing or developing your payment scheme for MSMEs. So I think that's the number one takeaway. The other thing is sort of a successful payment scheme development really has 4 components. You have to look at the regulation and supervision, which has been sort of the focus of your work so far. You have to think about sort of the second layer is the business aspect. The third layer is the delivery, and the last one is the technical. So you have to make sure that you sort of address all of these things when you're thinking about a payments system, and the regulatory aspect is sort of the first step. And of course, this brings in the regulators and so forth. So in terms of some of the best practices, again, what we've seen is that it's so critical that when you're thinking about regulatory harmonization, that you bring all the key stakeholders to the table to discuss sort of what are the needs, and some of it has been, shared on this webinar here. But I'm sure you've also had these discussions, I know you've had some stakeholder engagements and so forth, so that whatever you land on is participatory and it's actually owned, so that people are and participants have ownership of the final thing. So those are sort of the critical things. The 2 things that I would say: the design principles, as well as these components of the payment scheme, which includes the policy and sort of the regulatory as sort of the key main pillar for a payment scheme, development.
That's very key. And I like the fact that you talked about the need for a holistic approach from multi-stakeholders. They need to all come together. So maybe you could also touch, also within the US context, it's very interesting, especially now since with the congratulations on the US for the new president-elect, President Biden. But as we're discussing this, it's also good to understand the key role of public-private partnerships in ensuring that a great outcome, in terms of efficiency and sustainability on cross-border payments is put in place. What's your experience across the board in terms of the drive and political will to support such initiatives that are initially enabling the private sector to do business better?
So absolutely. So I think it's critical, as has been your experience in COMESA region, that this public-private partnership is sort of the key ingredient for success. The financial sector, the financial services, is a private sector play. It is provided by the private sector for the most part in most countries, but at the same time, it's also regulated and supervised by central banks, ICT or telecom regulators. So to be successful, to be more efficient, and to have a successful outcome, you have to bring all the players to the table and discuss and land on some of the things, as I said, around the payment schemes, the regulation, the business, the delivery, pricing, governance, operator, and so on and so forth. So it is very critical that you bring the public and private sector together. I think there are, even on a continental level, I think this is something that has been very much understood and is being spearheaded by the likes of the African Union. Dr. Asfour has mentioned AU several times here, but there has been, as many of you know, the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa that has been put in place by the African Union heads of state, approved earlier this year. And there's a keen recognition that in order to succeed, you have to bring both the public sector and the private sector to come together to build the digital economy across the continent. So you really can't succeed without bringing these together, both at a continental level and even in the development of a scheme similar to the one that you're trying to develop in COMESA.
Thank you. So political will is very key, and that experience is cross-cutting along the board. That's actually very, very important. I want to come to you, Dr. Asfour, because Dilly has also mentioned that you're wearing the AU hat here, and there's a question from the floor from, I think, is Wendell Adi?
Yeah.
Yes, and she's raising a question: how does the African Business Council fit into coordinating and leading common agendas, I think, but also strong currency from the private sector perspective and the integration of the various platforms being discussed? I think to rephrase her question, I think she's also wondering the role of the ABC in terms of pushing digital financial inclusion across Africa, across the continent. And I think that question also links directly with what Dilly has mentioned on the digital transformation strategy for Africa. So how are we doing as a private sector on that front?
Exactly, and I wanted to comment on what my sister Dilly had said, and also my brother Wendell Edgy, because the whole issue is really about driving the agenda and the public-private sector and the political leadership and the political will. So the role of ABC, the Africa Business Council, I see it as an inclusive body umbrella that embraces all the business councils within the RECs, like COMESA Business Council, the SADC, the ECOWAS, all of it under umbrella, because COMESA Business Council sits on the board of Africa Business Council, is that apart from the executive bureau, we will have technical committees. And my intention, inshallah, that we will have a technical committee for the digital economy and for financial inclusion that will make sure that we as private sector interact, as Dilly said, with the public sector, and to see what is the regulatory framework, the conducive environment, and make sure we advocate to those regulatory frameworks with the heads of states, because it will be a channel, a platform, advocacy, the Africa Business Council, that will engage directly with the heads of states and the political leaders for giving the common position of the private sector. So if we're talking about now the digital economy is talking about financial inclusion, we need them to put this law just exactly as we did with the public procurement, because it fits directly of what we say of empowering our SMEs. As the COMESA Business Council, we address the heads of state to have a special preferential treatment for public procurement for SMEs, and it was implemented in Kenya. 30% of all government procurement goes to SMEs, women, youth, and people with disabilities. So now also advocating for our digital economy and financial inclusion. That's why President Ramaphosa also has already, I had the pleasure to talk to His Excellency and advocate for the financial inclusion for women. And that's how now the decade of African women inclusion has started 2020 till 2030, a whole decade for financial inclusion for women. And I think the role of our Africa Business Council to see how to build on this political leadership and to see how we engage as a platform with different sectorial and technical committees, because he also said that we would have at least 30% of all public procurement goes to women-owned businesses from all Africa. He implemented this in South Africa. 40% now of government procurement goes to SMEs, women, youth. So our engagement with the heads of states and the political leaders during the summits as an Africa Business Council that impresses all the councils will take into position the financial inclusion, the simple digital payment solution. So at that point, private sector will invest in infrastructure to have broadband facilities. It will invest in telecommunication company. It will invest as long as we have the conducive environments and the incentives of the private sector to really invest in this. Then I believe this is the healthy relation between bringing the all stakeholders together and the players to have the conducive environments and for the digital payment solution.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Asfour. Very, very interesting, very insightful. There's a question from Jane Thu. She says, is it possible for CBCs to strengthen synergies and identify critical enablers in order to support cross-border trading and small small-scale farming. I must inform you, I'm glad you raised this question, Jane, just as a bit of information. If you go onto our website is almost like a portal, I'll say a web portal, and you click on digital financial inclusion, you will see the advisory committee of this particular project, who are actually enablers from across Africa. We have the Central Bank of Zambia sitting on the committee. We have Airtel Africa, that is James in his capacity leads the group of MNOs representing. He is representing a group of MNOs within COMESA Business Council. We also have the commercial banks represented by KCB. We have Vodacom that is also working very closely with Airtel. We have non-payment, we have fintech companies like TechnoBrain who are also driving initiatives here. We have Bayer and Coca-Cola who are representing manufacturers and are also representing, who have also brought on board SMEs who are working very closely with them. And we also have the Kenya Bankers Association that is also holistically bringing together banks within Kenya who are also very, very big within the region. So we've definitely put together an eclectic group of enablers to drive this agenda so that it is transparent and it's also responding to the needs of our membership and our consumers on the ground. So we will engage with you. You can always write to us directly and we can engage with you to give you more information on this. And this goes for everybody in the audience. Can I ask my team to just put in the communications email so that we can also engage bilaterally with anybody who'd want to have who has more questions on this particular matter. So now, Bruno, I'm turning to you, my SME man here on our panel. Yes, because a lot of questions are definitely coming back to you as the SME. So, do you see digitalized industry and enterprise models, such as the one that we're discussing here, boost you as a business? Do you see it as commercially viable? Do you see yourself, if you're using this tool, do you see yourself in the next 5 years penetrating new markets in Africa, becoming more sustainable and competitive, and even considering moving to global markets, which is aligned with what we're doing as COMESA Business Council? We're building regional and we're going global. Is it a value proposition for you as a business?
The answer is 100% yes. And I mean, if you take a value chain approach to just look at this issue, you can actually see that that helps you all the way from in terms of access to financial services, be it for startups. If we can have a way of getting all these startup funds, expansion in terms of asset financing, your tractors, and all the other implements that you need. Critical working capital, very critical. And also what I call the downstream, logistics, transportation, and things like that. If digital financial, services can also enable us to be able to see these downstream, logistics, that would actually be great. And also then bring in aspect of insurance. I think now we have this weather-based, index insurance, crop yield, and the like. All those are very, very critical, aspects that speak to financial inclusion. Then comes one other bit which is also very critical, which is input. Purchases. We want quality seed. Okay, and sometimes it's not always that you'll find quality seed within Zambia. So you need to be able to have a platform that will enable you to see where else you can source, these seeds wherever you are. Whether you're in Kenya, you'll find maybe Zambia offers you the better seed. But then you need platforms that can actually enable you to see seamlessly what seed, and then there are reviews there, so that you actually get, to make a decision based on that. And then there's also issue of price discovery.
So you see the aspect of e-commerce platforms supporting this, and tracking traceability platforms supporting you as a business. Yeah. What about what about you? Discovery. Yes. What about also assisting you in terms of illicit trade? Because I'm sure as a business you face challenges where you need to authenticate a real product versus a genuine product versus a substandard product. Do you see this system also, facilitating that?
That's very, very critical, because sometimes it's actually, and this is why I say also having reviews, because the beauty is that with these platforms, there are all these, reviews that are attached, especially when you're doing, digital services. So it actually enables you to really see what's genuine and what's not, because the reviews themselves would actually have a telling effect. But as it were, it becomes very difficult for you to actually assess whether you're dealing with a genuine or fake product. So that's very, very critical. That speaks to issues of transparency. And like I said, also, I think in terms of just payment platform, I think that's something that's been discussed, especially for cross-border. I think James alluded to the fact that, yes, Zambia into Tanzania, but Tanzania cannot reciprocate. I think that's something that can and needs to be ironed out across the region beyond just the Tanzania case, because that's a very, very critical aspect if you're going to do cross-border trading. So I think we need to iron out those issues and remove what I call information asymmetry across the whole value chain system of how you do the transaction. Real-time market prices, like I said, prices, where do you get the best prices? Logistics, I think I already talked about that. And also just knowing the do's and don'ts from a tax perspective, so that you weed out you being a victim of corruption, because sometimes when you don't know, then you fall prey to corrupt elements and things like that. So when you've got this seamless system that provide all these services real time, then you are in the know. And then when you're in the know, that helps you to really be a fully operational and agile, SME who can trade across the borders with minimal, issues. Okay,
but now what happens to you when you're dealing with your stakeholders at the grassroots level? Like your small scale farmers, the smallholder cooperatives and the like. How would you incentivize them to use the system at a domestic level and also across the board? Because I think that's also the challenge. Giving incentive to the cross-border trader, the micro, small, and medium enterprise to embrace digital financial services. How would you be able to would you want to run that as a business? Would you want to cascade it as a business, and how would you do it?
To be honest, people on the ground, to start with, the best thing that they want actually to see is trust. That this thing works, and then works with speed. Unfortunately, most of our colleagues' credit terms is not their thing. They want bang, bang, the money is with them. So you need to demonstrate that this is quite secure, it's fast, and then it affords you having a wider area in terms of the market access, So of course, there's a bit of gap analysis to be done to really understand what are some of the other bottlenecks, but that's something that can actually be done on the ground to demonstrate that this works, and it works seamlessly without any issues. So I think that's a very big aspect to dealing with our colleagues at the grassroots level. And then the other aspect I think that we need to look at is the issue of awareness about the availability of some of these services. I think James also alluded to, and my colleague in Kenya indicated quite a lot of very juicy systems that are already at play. But then you find the people, I think, on the grassroots are actually not in the know about some of these services. So we still have quite a long way to go. And that also borders also on the language issue, because most of these things are done in English or French or whatever. But then what I call the grassroots, languages are not mainstreamed into these digital, payment platforms or for them to be able to interact with ease. So I think we need to work with that, because I mean, let's just face it, there are just certain people who are, a bit allergic to English. Sometimes they just, oh, no. I mean, this thing, I can't understand it. I can't relate with it. So we need to go down and be able to interface with them in the language that they're comfortable, so that then they can actually judge on their own, read on their own, and see whether it's something that they can touch. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And in fact, from that, I think I've already even got your recommendations, because you've raised aspects of trust, awareness, providing value-added services within the digital ecosystem that allows you to transact across markets, the aspect of language, and you talked about pricing. I think you've emphasized it a lot. Pricing, driving the cost downwards.
Price discovery, very, because we get duped usually. You're just from selling, and then the other guy was selling double the price.
Okay.
You know.
So in that, so you'd want like a minimum threshold, or you'd want price standardization across the board? Because this is a competitive space.
Not necessarily price standardization. What we're looking at is just that you have a platform where you can actually see how much this guy is willing to buy. So that, negotiate. I mean, it's an open market. Yeah, but sometimes because of these information asymmetry issues, you end up selling half the price, but then the next day someone is asking you, well, I was willing to pay double the price. You know, but then there was no way of you knowing that there's this willing buyer, and then they're willing to buy at such a premium price. So okay. We're just trying to iron out information asymmetry issues so that you get the best value for your hard-earned, you know, farming money. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Now I'm just turning to you, James. So James, the last question as we come to the end of this of our session is, so how can transaction data collected by MNOs be leveraged to develop value-added services to upscale usage of cross-border payments? And this question touches on what I was asking you earlier. What has Airtel done for SMEs in Africa? Apart from providing the service, what have you done to boost their capacity to become stronger consumers of your product as part of your responsibility as a business operating in our African markets?
Yeah, so to start with, in terms of data, transaction data, I think transaction data gives us one thing, that one, there's a huge opportunity. I don't know whether it was Bosco who had mentioned in terms of the trade.
Sorry, and with your response, James, please also give me 2 recommendations, because we are also coming to the end of it. We have 10 minutes to the end of the meeting. Give me 2 recommendations that you'd want to provide as an MNO industry. Thank you.
Yeah, so Bosco had mentioned the trade numbers in relation to actually the transaction values that go on cross-border payments. And you find that there's still a huge gap. And from our perspective as a nation, actually, as Zambia, that is still well below 4% in terms of, if you look at the trade, cross-border trade versus the actual transactions that go on digital financial services. So by getting that kind of data, we are actually looking at the opportunity that is there in the market in terms of how we can leverage in growing cross-border trade and actually doing activations around the border towns. And I also mentioned the ability of us also reaching the Kasumbalesa border thing. So I think that is one aspect that we look at in terms of also looking at the kind of numbers. Each MNO has submits those numbers to the central bank, and through that consolidation of numbers, we're able to determine the market size and how each MNO relates to the total market size that is there, and we begin to actually leverage on the competitiveness that exists. So in terms of recommendations, I think I've already alluded to 2. I think one of them is actually in terms of harmonizing of transaction limits across for cross-border trades. You recall that I think most of these were pegged, the limits were pegged a few years back when the dollar was at a certain fixed local currency. And now the dollar has actually fluctuated to an extent of where we are actually seeing those transaction limits that were there in dollar terms actually being equivalent to almost half the amount that it was then. So I think in terms of that, we actually need to start addressing the issue of harmonize the limits based on the exchange fluctuations. So we would also want to see the way, I think I think somebody talked of political will. And I think in Zambia, we are actually very, very fortunate. And I think across the region as well, we've seen there's a lot of government involvement in driving not only digital financial services, but financial inclusion as a whole. So, and I think that needs to actually be looked at a regional level where the all intra-government and intergovernment relations start speaking in terms of the same language on driving financial inclusion, not only in country, but also cross-border. And I think the last one, which we've talked about, was in terms of, I think Bruno also highlighted that consumer awareness. I think that's what's huge. we really need to drive it and together. And I think this is where, for us, I think the central bank has led the way, I think in a commendable way in terms of driving customer education in the use of digital financial services. And it's really been pushed, and they've actually, if you looked at from transactions before the COVID period, we've actually grown in terms of that, because the central bank actually increased the customer limit, and they've gone ahead to actually sensitize customers on how to use digital financial services. So while this pandemic has been has had its negative side, I think from the digital financial side, we need actually to maintain the momentum in terms of customer education, to just keep telling customers that cash is expensive and cashless is the way to go, especially in these times. And I think with that, that's all my recommendation I had at this stage.
Thank you. That's very, very good to hear from you. Now I'll come to the bankers, to you, Fidelis. What recommendation would you also like to give to this panel as we come to a close on improving cross-border payments in the COMESA region, and also on the aspects of collaboration between the financial services regulators and the ICT regulators, and also between the banks, the commercial banks, and the mobile network operators?
Just before I give my recommendations, let me just emphasize something that Bruno alluded to in terms of consumer protection. All what we are trying to do will probably not come to much fruition if the consumers don't trust the system. And to develop trust, we must then make sure that their interests are protected. So I'm looking at cross-border transactions where I'm supplying goods from Kenya to, let's say, Egypt. I'm supposed to be paid via digital money, which is instant or almost instant. One of the questions the panelists was asked about is about refunds. We should have a way of making sure that there is a finality of settlement, so that I cannot receive goods and then refuse to pay for them, and somebody is in another country where they cannot get me. So we have to have a way of, number one, making sure that there's trust in the system. People know there is what we call SLAs in business, so that people can be able to trade with some confidence of laws across countries. So we need to have a way of making sure that for these SMEs, there is a very affordable dispute resolution mechanism that does not involve international lawyers and international arbitrations. So those are things we need to start looking at as COMESA business, so that this thing can add value and develop trust within the ecosystem. Cybersecurity and data protection, I think we didn't get into that, but that's very critical in digital payments. We really must ensure that the platform is very, very well managed in terms of IT risks and frauds and such issues. So those are things we need to start looking at, so that we develop trust within the system. Now, for collaborations across the region, I mean, we are already collaborating through COMESA Business Council. There is the East African Bankers Association. We even hosted a delegation from Egypt, from the Egypt Bankers Association, to discuss ways that these industries can then collaborate to make business smoother. So all we need to do is then include the business communities into these discussions. By business communities, I mean the consumers of the business, like Bruno, because he can bring into perspective the things that he as a business requires that we probably don't see sitting in our offices as businesses ourselves. We also need to have that, and the collaboration between public-private partnership engagements. I mean, every month I sit with my central bank and discuss the issues that the industry has. At that COMESA level, we should also have those engagements, so that government is frequently appraised of what it is we are doing and the pain points of businesses, so that they can be able to adequately respond, and where they also have challenges, they can tell us, so that we can come up with solutions. I think that would be my contribution in the short time that you have given me. Thank you.
Thank you, Fidelis. Thank you very much. I'm begging the audience to just accommodate us for the next 5 minutes as we are coming to a close so that we can hear the recommendations from the entire panel. But before we even move to those recommendations, I just want to inform the audience and the panel that the policy areas that are going to be considered for regional harmonization for the regional common payment policy for SMEs are as follows. Anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism. Just to respond to your issue, Fidelis, on touching on cybersecurity and data protection. These are the key areas that will be considered in terms of regional policy harmonization. There's also the Electronic Transaction Act, interoperability of various digital financial service providers, the aspect of cybersecurity to ensure digital platforms payments are well protected. Consumer protection is very key. That will also be considered at that level by the various multi-regulators and stakeholders. Non-banks and bank settlement systems operating rules, the National Digital Financial Inclusion Framework to see which areas should be harmonized across the board, and of course, mobile money guidelines. So there are 8 policy areas that will be discussed next year within the high-level public-private dialogue. And I believe we'll be engaging with you as KBA and other bankers association when we're driving this agenda at the time. Yeah. So I would like to now turn to you, Dilly. What are your recommendations to this floor in terms of key outcomes that can support digital cross-border payments within Africa?
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I think a lot of it has been said here already. I think for me, 2 things. One is really at every level of intervention, as has already been done with the COMESA Business Council, is to really think about, assess every intervention against the sort of the design principles that enable payment schemes that are, that meet the needs of low-income people. And in the case of cross-border payments, we know that cross-border traders in general, we know that the majority of these are micro enterprises, usually one person, usually women, the majority of it. So it's very important that any payment scheme that's been designed, any policy framework or regulation that's put in place really takes the design principles into consideration. Some of it was mentioned here, things like irrevocability, finality of payments, so you reduce the risk for people that really can't afford for payments to be reversed once they're made. Things like real time, it needs to be instant. Somebody mentioned it here that I think it's Bruno perhaps that talked about, like, smallholder farmers or MSMEs want their money right away. They can't afford to just wait around 2-3 days, 10 days to get their payments and so forth. So there's a whole lot of design principles that really need to be taken into consideration as you're moving forward on this initiative. The second thing is really focusing on being gender intentional in all the sort of interventions that are happening. We talked about, as an example, the COVID-19 payments. As digitization is happening at warping speed, it tends to be gender blind in many cases. So how can you make sure that that's not the case? In fact, what we find is in some instances, not everywhere, but in some countries, even as financial inclusion increases, as more people become financially included, the gender gap between men and women's access to financial accounts or account ownership actually increases in some cases, which doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be the case. So how can we be more gender intentional in the design and delivery of projects, initiatives, whether it's a regulation, payment systems, infrastructure, digital financial services as a whole. So I think these are the 2 things that I would say are important for you to think about as you continue this important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Well noted also. And I believe a lot of people in the audience are also very, very keen to see how COVID-19 is also strengthening aspects of digital financial inclusiveness for women who have also greatly suffered in other socioeconomic factors besides aspects of being digitally excluded in so many spectrums. So it's good that you've raised that, Dilly. I'd now like to turn to you, Bosco, as TDB Bank, and also within your various hats. What recommendations would you like to give to the floor on this subject matter?
Thank you. And let me just be very brief, but before I give my recommendations, which are only two, let me just go back to what Bruno mentioned about price discovery, because that kicked back my experience at the exchange, at the commodity exchange. What we need to do in Africa or in COMESA, we need to have an inbuilt system in the payments, which can come in very well, to be able to display prices of commodities anywhere in the region, so the trader or the buyer can be able to choose and at what price. That's a very important element that he brings in, which can actually give value to the payment system, the cross-border payment system, if that's embedded into the systems. So I didn't want that to go out without mentioning it. Now,
yes,
my recommendation would be one. The first recommendation would be let the public and private sector have a common vision on what they want in a payment system. That's one. And two, it's about regulation. Now, with the regulation, let's be careful. Regulation in terms of rules and procedures and rules on do this and don't do this, that can stifle business. Let's be cautious about it. But the regulations to be put in place by the regulators should be in three elements should be involved. One is the currency convertibility. I think Bruno or James mentioned that traders sometimes Zambia would buy and then Tanzania doesn't buy, or something like that happens. So once that happens, there's always an imbalance in trade, and one country ends up holding the other country's currencies, and they don't use it. So that should be part of the rules. The regulators must come in, especially central banks, on that. And also, we must have interoperability as a rule. One of the rules should be about interoperability. And then the third should be in real timeness. The payment should be in real time. It shouldn't be a deferred system. A deferred system will not serve us well, because any trader needs money now, not in the future. I think I will stop at that for now. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bosco. And we look forward to having these very, very key engagements. And I hopefully the central bank, the meeting we'll have with the central bank governors in general will definitely consider these particular aspects. So I now would like to turn to Dr. Asfour. Dr. Amani Asfour, what is your final recommendation to the meeting as we come to a close?
Thank you, Sandra. I mean, I second my brother Bosco. I was going to say a common position. Now he says a common vision. So it's a common position for all of us as stakeholders. It's a competitive and a conducive environment. It's a competitive and affordable financial products targeting all our sectors, including SMEs, women, and youth. It's about collaboration, coordination among all of us. It's really about coming together to make sure that the outreach strategy, we have to have an outreach strategy to reach to all our sectors across the whole over the COMESA region and the continent. And it's about capacity building for our women and youth and SMEs for financial literacy and for financial inclusion and digital literacy also. And it is really about getting incentives for the private sector to invest in infrastructure and to invest in and to make sure that there is this interoperability with reference to the regulatory framework. So it's really about also data, because my sister Dilly talked about data. We need to have sex disaggregated data with reference to women entrepreneurs on the ground, because when we have this data, we have a very good solid base to lobby and advocate according to evidence-based data, because this is really what we need. And I now wear my hat as the president of African Alliance for Women Empowerment and the international president of International Federation of Business and Professional Women, that we need to have this sex-segregated data mainstreamed across all our statistics, our data, to make sure that we have this data in order when we advocate for the certain inclusive and conducive environment, we have such data, because all our SMEs have majority are women, all cross-border women traders, majority are women on the ground. So we constitute a huge market of the consumers that all the players here are working to reach our women on the ground and SMEs and youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And before we close that, because I think this last question is coming back to you, where you could touch on the Africa E-Trade Group, the products, the commerce platform that is being set up by Afro-Exim Bank and the like, who are all very close colleagues of yours. What are we doing towards building digital hubs that provide free access to digital online workstations or suits for women and the rest of the informal sector population? So I think even the 50 million Africa Women Speak program comes into play here. If you could respond to that question under a minute.
Yeah,
so that we can respond to Ernest.
That is great. Thank you, Ernest, because this is exactly what we're trying to do to see how we can harmonize all the initiatives on the ground. We have the platform by Afro-Exim Bank. We have the Africa Trade Group, which is really launched the continental, the Sukuku Africa, which will be like our Amazon, our Alibaba, and to see how we implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area with having a strong platform, like also 50 million women speak. So how to harmonize among all of us and how to make sure that each product that is made in Africa, because this is what we need, not to bring in from China or Dubai or any other country to make trade among us. We need to have a product, a strong African product, competitive, value added, packaging, branding, designing, trademark, a strong product that we have this digital economy, digital platform to promote our product and how we know the visibility. There is a lot of products across all of us that we don't know about each other. We need to understand. And with Africa Electronic Trade Group, they have already made the sponsorship for SMEs to register sponsored on the platform to make sure that they give them incentives in order to promote their products, which will be with the payment system, be accessible to all our 55 countries across the region. And now we're making MOU also with 50 million women speak with all the existing initiatives. So we have a harmonized platform to promote our African product for women, for SMEs, for youth, for all the private sector of Africa in clusters. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, our audience, I'd like to thank you for consistently being with us from the beginning of the webinar, from 2:30 until now, 4:42. I'd like to thank my panelists of business leaders, drivers, development partners, strong SMEs on the ground, also our regulators who are here in present. We shall continue this discussion again in a live session and a hybrid meeting on the 20th and 21st of January with our multi-stakeholders who will be helping us to advocate for and push for a model policy on a digital common payment, a model policy on digital common payments for SMEs. And this policy, of course, will inform the foundation for a business model approach that will be piloted by some countries on a low-value retail digital payment scheme for micro, small, and medium enterprises. So on that note, I'd like to come to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone in the audience, for your comments and your compliments. We look forward to seeing you again. And this being the last webinar of the year, I'd like to wish you all good festivities, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2021. You can always find our information on our details and our webinars on our Facebook page, on our Instagram pages, and you can follow us on various social media platforms to just look at our recommendations and our follow-up actions on this particular webinar. So, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Airtel Africa, Panuka Farms, Egyptian Businesswomen Association, Kenya Bankers Association, Trade and Development Bank. I'd like to thank you all, and I wish you all a lovely day. Be well.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to know you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
All of you. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Sandra.
Bye-bye, Dr. Spoor.